Thank you. And welcome back, everyone. It's Scott Becker again, and we have another information-rich session today entitled Cost Shootout, comparing the list prices, hidden costs, and other IT savings of the major public cloud platforms. Joining us for this session is Howard M. Cohen, Sr. Howard
there is no junior.
Senior resultant. Senior resultant at the Tech Channel Partners Results Group. Howard will get into his background a little bit when he starts, but the reason I'm excited that Howard, that you're presenting today is because this session focuses on the budgeting and cost side of cloud and the way the major clouds compare. And the audience, I've known Howard for a long time. I was really excited to get him to do this particular session because of his focus. Over the years, it's always been a combination of technology and business. Howard really understands and gets excited about the technology trends. He's also got experience running a technology business, consulting technology businesses, and the economics of information technology. And he knows business models, business cases, hidden costs, basically all the knowledge you want in a guide to make a business decision about cloud. So Howard, thanks for joining us, and welcome to the webcast.
Thank you, Scott. It's my pleasure. I counted, and audience, tell me if you think this is right, I counted 3 age slams in that introduction. And I just wanted to point that out.
They were not slams.
Neither of my sons would appreciate me being called senior, because that would make them junior. Okay. So yes, I am Howard M. Cohen, senior resultant for HMC right now. I spent 35 years in the channel as an executive. Half of that being in charge of sales, marketing, and business development, at which time my personal battle cry was, "Trust me, I'm in sales." Anyway, the other side was professional and managed services. I lived on both sides. I understood what it took to deliver great services to clients, and I understood what it took to sell them. And I understood the argument between those two and was able to really bridge the gap. About 11 years ago, I decided it was time to break out of it. 35 years was enough. And so today I write for and about the channel and technology, the channel business, as Scott pointed out. I write for many channel publications. My favorite, of course, hint, hint, my favorite, of course, is Redmond Channel Partner, where I had a column called The Changing Channel for 7 years. And I do refer to myself as a senior resultant. Resultant because I'm all about results. And that's how I was raised in the business. It's great, you made terrific effort, but you know what? I only measure you by your results. The senior is another age slam, just to point out that I'm a lot older than most people you meet in the channel these days. Okay. So what we have on the screen right now is an old software license. And for those of you who've been around the technology industry for any length of time, you probably consider software licensing to be the equivalent of rocket science. It's complex. There's lots of detail. You can really get lost in it, and many people do. Many people built their careers on software licensing, becoming experts at software licensing. So that's all good. Well, if you thought that software licensing was rocket science, wait till you get a hold of cloud pricing. It wasn't always this way, but with every passing year, cloud pricing becomes more intricate, more complex, more difficult to understand. There are more idiosyncrasies floating around. There's more gotchas, things that you have to watch out for. But of course, there's more opportunities to forge a wonderful program that will keep your costs minimal and your service levels maximal. Let's get into that a bit. This all begins with a very important document. If you have not read this document already, it's a long read. It's 4 pages. And it's NIST publication 800-145, NIST being the National Institute of Standards and Technology, part of the Department of Commerce. This document is the de facto standard, the yardstick, the reference point by which everybody defines cloud computing. And when you read it, you'll understand why a lot of things are called what they're called. They make more sense when they're taken in context. Well, one of the things that's said when it's talking about the general characteristics of cloud computing, one of those general characteristics is rapid elasticity. Rapid elasticity, meaning you can provision more services and release them at will. And that's great. When you need something, provision it, request it, and when you're done with it, return it, because all the resources are shared. And that's how the economies of scale are created. The thing that they don't mention in the document, but that everybody has seized upon, is that because you're requesting and releasing, you get to pay only for what you use. You're not paying for a resource at any time other than when you use it. That's great. So there's lots of great savings to be had in the cloud. And honestly, cloud met a lot of resistance at first, but the economics of scale and the economics of the way cloud works were just too irresistible. And cloud has been growing and gaining more users constantly over the past decade or more. Where do those savings come from? The first and foremost is capital investments. You don't have to buy any more computer equipment, like server class equipment, storage equipment, so forth and so on. You don't have to buy that anymore because you're not going to use it. You're using somebody else's equipment. So all of your investments go away, and you don't spend that big money anymore. Rent on a space to house all that equipment. You don't have to have a network closet or a data center anymore. Somebody else is serving you. You have none of the physical plant costs. You don't have to buy furniture. You don't have to buy fire extinguishers. You don't have to buy halon protection. You don't have to buy any of that or rent or pay for any of that. That's all gone. If you don't own equipment, you can't be powering it, so you have a much lower need for electrical power. Same with cooling. You don't have to cool equipment you don't have. You don't need extra internet bandwidth for it. You don't need to maintain it. You can't maintain something that's not there. You don't have to manage those systems, which means that your headcount drops, and payroll being a very big budget line item. Many people are very happy to see that reduce when the people that are being released are not core to their company's business. And IT is not core to their company's business in most cases. It may be shoes. It may be food. It may be heavy equipment. But whatever it is, it's not IT. This has given us a redefinition of the computer store. This is a classic computer store, and they're still out there, although they're starting to get closed. There you can find all kinds of computers, desktop computers, laptop computers, server class computers, storage devices, peripherals like printers and scanners, software, accessories. It's all there. You can go browse around and pick out what you want. Of course, you can't browse around the cloud like that. It changes a bit. Today's computer store, if you will, looks a little more like this. Whether it's Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, it's a data center. And it looks more or less like this data center. And in this data center, you get to pick out your computers. They have a whole long shopping list of computers for you to choose from. And you can choose the platform that you want and tailor it to your application, which, as we all know, everything begins with the application. There's also a wealth of services for you to take advantage of, and we'll talk a lot more about that shortly. There are storage options. There's all kinds of options, and they're all here in your cloud computer store, your cloud computer resource. You pick and choose them, and the good news is you don't have to pack them in the back of the car and take them home. They're simply available to you upon demand. And a big difference in the way that we go about shopping. Now, what you'd love to be able to do is an apples-to-apples comparison between Amazon, Google, and Microsoft and how they provide cloud services. Unfortunately, not every Apple is the same. Yeah, they're all members of the family of cloud computing services, but they each operate differently. They each have different standards. They each have different services configured different ways. Many times they call the same thing different names or use the same name to describe different things. It gets very, very confusing very, very fast. So we really can't do an apples to apples comparison, but we can compare and contrast these three sources of cloud services. One way is, of course, the famous Gartner Magic Quadrant, which going up and down is the ability to execute. Going across is their completeness of their vision. And you'll notice, of course, that Amazon Web Services is furthest up and to the right, meaning they're better on both. That's good news for them. Microsoft is very slightly behind them in the completeness of their vision, but Gartner considers them to be not quite as good in their ability to execute their services. And of course, Google is still in the leaders quadrant. And it's important to note, all three of the leaders are in the leaders quadrant. You'll notice in the niche players quadrant, one of the players there is maybe unfamiliar to some of you, Alibaba Cloud. There's Tencent Cloud. There are several other cloud platforms that were created on the other side of the world that are very quickly coming on shore. And you can expect to see them vying with the big three as we move forward. So Gartner has evaluated the three and compared and contrasted them this way. So you won't be surprised that when we take a look at their market share, well, Amazon has the biggest market share. I joke often that everybody thinks that Amazon is an e-commerce service that happens to also sell web services. The reality is, if you look at their bottom line, they're a web services company that happens to have an e-commerce division. Amazon Web Services is enormous. And it owns a third of the market. Now, if you look at Microsoft Azure Cloud, Google Cloud, and IBM Cloud, and you total them up, they take 32% of the market, meaning that Amazon outsells its next three competitors, which is amazing. But it's been true for several years now, and it's actually narrowing somewhat, but not as quickly as some might have you believe. See, Amazon is continuing to grow 41%. Now, you'll note that Microsoft's doing much better. They're growing by 75% year over year, and Google is growing by 83%. But you have to do the math, and when you're multiplying $2.3 billion by 83%, you're not getting quite as far as you do when you're growing by 41% of $7.6 billion. So while the rate of increase is higher, and they may be catching up to some degree, Amazon is still enjoying healthy growth and will probably stay out in the lead for some time to come unless something cataclysmic happens. And that's not so far in the forecast. Here's the problem with all of this. Frost & Sullivan did a study and found that more than half of the IT leaders they talked to think managing costs to run their cloud workloads is big. That's a major problem that they face. It's not the costs themselves, it's the management of those costs. It's hard to define them, hard to keep track of them. Frost & Sullivan predicts that the providers will address that by simply consolidating and simplifying their pricing programs. This will give users a better ability to predict and compare their costs. Yeah, somebody tell them that. So far, we have not seen that happen. Quite the contrary. We've seen prices become more complex, more difficult. And, there's always margin in mystery, they say. So they've got compelling reasons why they want to do it. Hopefully that will turn around because of competitive forces. Vance and Bourne adds that 70% of CIOs say it's the sheer number of different ways to pay, the different programs that are available, and we're going to be reviewing some of those today. It makes it very difficult to select the right cloud solution. I'm going to tell you that selecting the right cloud solution obeys the same rules that we've always obeyed, and that is that everything begins with the application. What is it you need to do? Let's figure out what you need to get it done. That will always be true. But then you have to go and figure out what is the most cost-effective way to do that, and that is the way that we approach pricing these days. Unfortunately, what Frost and Sullivan and Vance and Bourne are saying turns into cloud customers wasting almost half their spend. Think about that. Almost half their spend wasted because they didn't seek the right pricing programs, and they're paying for software, or they're paying for services that they don't need. And so this is a very, very big issue that needs to be focused on. And I will say that the best pre-sales engineers I've ever worked with study pricing every bit as hard as they study the technology that they represent. When they can advise their customer, when they can be a true consultant, helping their customer with the business aspects as well as the technology aspects, they are much more valuable to them. And so they become expert at weeding out the best possible way to configure pricing, just like they would configure servers for their customers. Here's the good news. The good news is there's plenty here that needs to be priced. It's good news because there's so much for you to take advantage of. There's so many services, so many new products, so many new developments all the time. Cloud computing is getting bigger and better all the time. That, to me, is really good news. The bad news, there's plenty here to be priced. As it gets better, it also gets more complex. And there's just no denying that. Unfortunately, that turns into it becoming easier to make mistakes. And that's why almost half of cloud customers are wasting half their spend. Okay, so we've been talking about pricing and there's plenty there to be priced. Let's talk about what needs to be priced. Most of you, when I talk about pricing for cloud computer services, your mind probably immediately went to subscriptions. It's the first thing anybody thinks of. It's how everybody relates to cloud services. They are monthly recurring expenses that you pay to take advantage of services. That's the price you pay for cloud computing. It's not the whole price. When you go to plan to build a cloud initiative, you need to be aware that there are three basic steps to pricing out the entire package. Upfront, the subscriptions themselves, and the ongoing costs. So let's not confuse the price with the ongoing cost. Let's start now with the upfront items, the things that have to be priced upfront. First and foremost, there's consulting. It is likely that none of you are cloud computing experts. So you probably don't really know how to begin to approach it. That's perfectly reasonable, perfectly logical. So you want to engage an expert who can help you with that. They can help you design your system so that you're not building it organically, buying things as you think you need them, but rather you're really planning for now and in the future. This includes developing your order for cloud services. As you see how complex the pricing is, you'll realize that building the initial order and ongoing orders is a complex science unto itself, rocket science, as we said at the beginning. So you need somebody who's familiar with it, somebody who knows it well, or you need to learn it well yourself. Then you come to cloud integration. One of the joys of the cloud is that you can pick and choose which cloud providers you want to obtain which cloud services from. It doesn't all have to be from one provider. Everybody used to talk about going to the cloud as if the cloud was a singular destination. It's not. It's millions now of different data centers all over the world providing different services. You can pick and choose the ones you want, but once you've done that, you've got to get them working well together. That is the ultimate definition of integration. In the old days, we used to integrate hardware and software from various different places. Now you're going to be integrating cloud services from different providers. They each speak different languages. They each speak different protocols. They each have different security standards. You've got to make sure they all work well with each other and can provide very efficient, very effective operation. One thing that many used to leave out of their planning, and some still do, is disaster planning. Right now, with what we're going through, it's very front of mind. What do we do when a disaster happens? And the good news is in the cloud, most cloud providers, the best ones certainly, have multiple cloud data centers. The big three have hundreds of them. And your data can all fail over from one to another very quickly. It's always replicated, and it's always available. So if a data center, an entire data center, becomes unreachable, there's another data center that can pick up the slack. And that's great. But a disaster recovery plan goes far beyond that. Let's say your cloud servers keep running, and they're very available. They're useless unless your users can access them, meaning you have to have a plan for where your users go, who they communicate with, how they communicate with them, and how they find another place to work where they can access your cloud computing resources. And there needs to be a plan for that, and it needs to be practiced on a regular basis. Soapbox away. Configuration. Each of these services is difficult to configure. How much do you need of everything? What are the protocols that need to be set? There's all kinds of specifications. You need an expert who can help you with that. Once that's done, you're going to need someone to help you to plan your migration. You've got a lot of data on-prem. You've got to move all that data to the cloud. Not a simple, not a trivial pursuit. This is difficult, and you need to plan it and execute it, and there are wonderful tools available to help you do that. However, you need to plan it. One of the reasons you need to plan is because there's so much of the data that you're not going to need to migrate to where it can be accessed live. It's data you haven't used in a long time, so you can archive it. You can put it into very low-cost storage and just get to it sometimes. You also need to be sure that you've got a plan for data backup. I don't care how many data centers the cloud provider has. You want your own belt and suspenders protection. You want your own alternate backup just in case. It may be illogical. It may seem expensive. It really depends upon the criticality of your ownership of the data. But many companies have found it necessary to use a separate service and separate equipment to back up their data off of their primary provider. So you need to provide for that. The other things you need to provide for are the different licenses, the different specifications, the different user IDs, all the information you need to make the services available to your users as they come onto the network. You do need to pay attention to directory management and directory design. You need a tree. You're going to be controlling who has access to what. You're going to be controlling security and authentication. Directory services is how you do it. And it doesn't go away in the cloud. It's still the easiest, most reliable way to manage resources and roles. You'll need to add users. As you said, you'll need to assign roles and resources to each user or each group of users. This should sound familiar to anybody who's ever used directory services. Security. You are responsible for security. End of story, full stop. Yes, your provider will provide wonderful security, but at the end of the day, if the data assets are compromised, it's not your provider they're going to come for. I guarantee it. You may have to install software on client devices. Some cloud services simply make the data available, but the application runs at the client end. Happens. You have to prepare the client devices and make sure that they're ready to rock and roll. You need to deploy these to all of your users, and once you've deployed them, you need to provide orientation and training to all of your users so that they know day one how to make best possible use of their new resources. But again, you price these and your consultant delivers them to you. Must be done. It's part of the planning, and it's part of making a great cloud happen. Now we get into subscriptions. Now, I'm going to put the big three plus one on the board. Okay, the big three are compute, storage, and network. Those are the three major services that you need to subscribe to. I put analytics in there with them because the earliest days of cloud, and it's still true today, the worst thing that can happen is you get a bill for overages, overuse, and that bill is a whopper. It's got 6 or 7 zeros following the numbers, and that can be career-threatening. So you want to always know that you have cloud analytics in place to make sure you know who's using what cloud services and to what extent. You know, what projects are they being used for, which departments are using them, which individuals in those departments. You want to be able to do chargeback and billbacks. You know, you also probably are using data in this network, and you're going to want analytics to help you determine the value you can get out of that data. So analytics is far more important than most people give it credit for, and it should be prescribed along with the big three. You're also going to have to do some software licensing. The fact is you're using applications and you're using operating systems. They have to be paid for one way or another. Yes, you can rent them from the provider, or the provider can simply sell them to you outright, or you can use existing ones that you're repurposing away from on-prem and moving them over to cloud. Lots of different strategies for you to make the best possible use of every software investment. You also need to pay for database. If you're using a database application and it has a database platform, you need to pay for the use of that database platform. And finally, I've put on here services. There are a lot of services, and we'll just try to move through those as quickly as we can. So let's start with compute. Compute is the majority of your spend. Okay, you'll get different pricing for development and testing and other pricing for production. That's one way in which it breaks down. But generally, you price compute in the format of virtual machines. Virtual machines contain all the resources you need to operate a server. They're modeled after a physical server. Logically, it looks like a server to you, but you can have dozens and soon hundreds of servers running on one hardware server machine. That's, again, when you have multiple tenants, you split the price, and that's how those economies of scale are achieved. The virtual machines come in different flavors, as you saw on that chart before. Some are general purpose, just like every server that's ever lived in any small to medium business and many larger businesses. Some are compute optimized for number crunching. Others are memory optimized for use with big data and manipulating big data. There are graphic processing unit instances available for very specialized high velocity image manipulation projects. It's important to look to be able to customize these to match your workload. The more you can match your workload, the less you'll end up paying for each of the machines, each of the virtual machines that you subscribe to. Before you saw this list on the screen, of course, this deck will be available to you from the interface, as are all the others. You can certainly consult this list, but at the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you links to complete calculators for each of the big three. So compute, when you subscribe to compute is based on what kind of server you're looking for, how many CPU cores are in there, how much memory is in there, how much storage is in there. Geographically, where are they located? That's actually important for many reasons. Be aware that if you do transfer data from one availability zone to another, you may incur transfer fees. Transfer fees may apply. Let that be a warning to you. There are plenty of fees like that, and they'll sneak up on you. So keep an eye out for them. They're all over the place. The title of this session talks about list price. List price really can be defined here as the on-demand price. If you were simply to go to a website and order up a virtual machine right now because you just need to use it for a little while, that will incur a charge that is list price, the highest price that the vendor provides. So that is the one way in which you can assure yourself of paying list price, which is something I'm sure nobody wants to do. And there are many discount programs available. This chart, which you can again look at in the deck, specifies three of the different types of servers, how many processors are in them, how much memory is in each one, and the memory allocated is usually aligned with the purpose. And it compares the three top sellers' prices so that you can compare and contrast how they compare and contrast. Now, again, look at it when you get to the deck. But let's right now focus in on discount programs. These are based on commitment. Let's start there. Commitment is the first and foremost way that you can get a better discount. You commit to 1 year, you commit to 3 years, you'll get a better price for those years. I don't know why nobody likes 2 years, but I'm sure there's a reason. But most of them do configure 1 and 3 year programs. If you pay for it all up front, you'll get a discount. They love getting your money right up front, so they'll give you a discount. Now, of course, you're thinking, well, how can I pay for it up front if I'm only paying for what I use? The answer is that along the way, they anticipate you're going to use more than you subscribe for. And there come those overage charges. So again, watch out for that. If you surrender the ability to make any kind of adjustments to your configurations, they'll give you a discount for that. It's saving them time and trouble. They're going to give you a discount to thank you for that. So that's another way that you can earn a discount. Another way is if you can do your work at specific times of day that are more convenient for the cloud provider, they'll give you a discount for use during slack periods. They'll also sell you spare capacity from time to time on special pricing when they have it. So that's a variety of ways. As I mentioned, the pricing is different for development and testing. There are often special prices offered specifically for that purpose because they know that when you're finished developing and testing, you're going to go into production, and you're going to be paying for that. So the big three each have their own different program, and I just thought I'd put up the names for you. Amazon offers reserved instances and then convertible reserved instances where you can change them later on, but you're going to have to pay a fee for that. Azure offers reserved virtual machine instances and a hybrid use discount that's available if you happen to have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft. Those of you who do have one, you know you have one. Those of you who don't, it's simply a master agreement for a wide variety of Microsoft services that you're committing to consuming. And you'll find that there are things in there that end up never getting used, and you're paying for those. But it does earn you terrific pricing on a variety of things, including cloud computing. Enterprise agreements have always been very popular. And Google offers committed use discounts or sustained use discounts. If you have a workload that is working more than 25% of the time, they will automatically apply a discount to it. It's applied automatically, which is a nice benefit. So each of them have different names for it. Each of them have different rules and regulations, different standards, but each makes available programs to you. They each make a variety of storage programs available, and in different ways. There's object storage, block storage, a plain old vanilla file system. You can build a data warehouse, a data lake. There's all kinds of different storage configurations, and the one you choose is usually based on the application that's involved. Be aware that if you're using some of their more long-term archival storage services, there may be egress charges when you try to get that data from that resource. So again, another, not so hidden, but another additional fee that may apply. Also, if you request the use of their application programming interfaces, their APIs, if you request them, you may get charged for that as well. The good news is that overall, the cost of cloud computing decreases as usage rises, both individually for you and in the overall in the business. And again, I think this bullet just straight onto here. Okay. So there are a variety of different names for their storage products. You really need a Sherpa to interpret all of this for you, but those are the names of the storage programs. Analytics, you want to analyze your use of network. You want to analyze your software licensing to make sure you're making best possible uses. You need to subscribe for the database. You need to choose your database based on your application, based on the fundamental characteristics of each database. And again, you need a development expert. So there's going to be a lot of people involved in your team here, and that's going to be a cost as well. Then we get to the services. Now, what I'd like you all to do right now is buckle in, because we're going to go through this pretty quickly. I have chosen Google Cloud for this first group because it's the smallest of the three. It's got the smallest list. I think they have less than 100. I think in the last session we talked about that. They have fewer than 100 services on their directory right now. I thought I'd present them to you broken out by the different categories that they fall in. So for artificial intelligence and machine learning, here are all the services that are available to you if you want to use them in the cloud. For artificial intelligence platforms and accelerators, there's several of those. For management of APIs, several of those. There are several compute-based services that you can take advantage of. Several container. Most development today is microservices in containers. Fabulously resilient, fabulously reliable, fabulously agile. There's some services emerging there as well. Data analytics, we talked about the importance of analytics. A lot of them are expressed in this list of services. There are many different databases that are available to you. Many different development tools for your developers to use as they're building software in a cloud environment. Healthcare and life sciences, specific services for the healthcare industry. Hybrid and multi-cloud is becoming huge. Each of the cloud services has its own idiosyncrasies. And so people use different cloud services for different applications or even different parts of an application. You can absolutely mix and match, absolutely use them together. And here are some services to help you do that. The Internet of Things, the global Internet of Things. There are some services here and more are emerging even as we speak. Look at this list to grow dramatically. They provide management tools so you can manage your cloud environment just like you're accustomed to managing your on-prem environment, probably even better. There's media and gaming. For those of you who are building games, huge industry, very lucrative. There are services to help you get that done. Since you are on a network, there are networking services that you can use to do load balancing and create hybrid networks and so forth. All those services are available. Operation services, services to help you operate your applications, operate and integrate them into your fundamental business operations. There are, of course, security and identity management services to help you make sure that the only people who get access to things are people who are authorized to use them. Identity and access, these services are an extension of that. And again, very important. User protection services to protect your users and also to protect users from you. There are serverless computing services to enable you to have no servers on-prem whatsoever and still do all your computing. Services to help you manage storage. Let's catch our breath. Okay, that was fewer than 100. Now, let's go next to Amazon Web Services. They have more than 200. All right, how many of you thought I was going to go through all these? Well, good news, I'm going to spare you that. You get the idea. This is simply the list of categories of Amazon available services. This is just the categories. And here's Microsoft's list, just the categories. There are a quantity of services underneath each of these. Each one has its own technical idiosyncrasies and its own pricing idiosyncrasies. As you add them, you need to configure them, and different configurations will require different prices. So this is where it gets really hairy, really complex, and you need to be prepared for that. Again, you're going to specify the services based on what's needed for your application, and then you're going to make sure that you price each one of them correctly. Okay, we have now priced out our subscriptions. It wasn't easy, a lot of things to consider, but it has delivered us finally at what needs to be priced in the ongoing. For those of you who are in the audience who provide these services, these are your services. These are the services you will get from your cloud consultant long term. Support services. Users need support no matter what they're using. So you will have a help desk, or you'll have a dial-up capability, or an online capability, or a mix of the three. Analytics and interpretation of those analytics. It's great to have the information. If you can't make head or tails of it, it's useless to you. So you may need help interpreting the analytics that you generate across your use of cloud. Client device maintenance. Users are going to break their laptops, period. It's just that simple. You need an exchange program. You may still be operating out of a brick and mortar office, although after this pandemic, I think that'll be fewer and fewer of us, but those devices need to be maintained, and so that the user can keep on working. One of the most important services to make sure you've obtained is cloud capacity monitoring and management. Again, think back to those days when those big overage invoices came out and managers lost their jobs because they didn't get in front of it. You don't want to be one of those. So somebody's got to be watching the store. Maybe one of your users didn't release a resource they requested, and you're paying for it night and day while that user's on vacation. Not fun. But you can spot it if somebody's managing and monitoring your use of cloud capacity. The network performance and continuity. If you have a need for full-time computing, you need to make sure somebody's on top of that. It's certainly possible in the cloud. There's plenty of redundancy out there, but somebody has to be sure that it all works flawlessly. Availability management. It's amazing, but every time you get an invoice from a cloud provider and you then get a report of your utilization, the two will match perfectly. Every time. Isn't that amazing? If you didn't detect the sarcasm dripping from my voice, you need to keep them just as honest as you ever kept a carrier. You've got to make sure that what they're telling you you used is what you show you used. Many people have received whopping returns and whopping rebates because they proved that they were being charged for things that they weren't using. There are big service companies that have grown up just to do that for you, just to make sure that the bills you receive truly reflect the services you've used. If you haven't already, institute a cycle of periodic disaster recovery testing. Have somebody come in and run you through a fake disaster and see if everything goes off the way it should and everybody does what they're supposed to do. Rehearsal is invaluable when the time comes that you run into a catastrophe and nobody knows what to do. Prevent that. Get in front of that. Okay. Next thing we're going to talk about are the gotchas. Just a few of them. You've already seen a whole bunch of them. But in terms of commitment, you're going to see pricing models that may seem very affordable to you, but they're affordable only until you decide, oh, I need to scale up. I need to get bigger. Or worst case, you need to scale down because of a business setback. You may get charged through the nose for those changes. When you commit to a period of utilization, make sure you read the fine print about the charges involved if you make any changes whatsoever. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Overages are your enemy. Make sure you know they're coming. Make sure you head them off at the pass if you can, or make sure that your financial management is aware of them before the bill arrives. There are many fees beyond the virtual machine itself. As we mentioned before, egress fees, transport fees, service fees, operating system fees. That's a small list. The list is longer and longer all the time. Cloud pricing trends. Here's the good news. There's something we call the virtuous cycle. Basically, it says that the more servers you stand up, the less you have to charge because the more resources you have available. This turns into better pricing all the time. The price of cloud computing can generally be said to be moving downward all the time. And of course, the competition between the bigs doesn't hurt that process. However, for those of you who lock in for a 1 or 3 year commitment, again, read the fine print. It may be that when that new generation pricing comes out and they've taken that virtuous cycle and translated it into savings for their customers, you may not be able to change to it. They may require you to complete your commitment at the price you contracted for. Negotiate that up front. Make sure it's in the fine print that if new generation pricing comes out, you will always see it reflected in your pricing. Many of the services talk about how they'll true up at the end of a period. You pay for a subscription, and then at the end, they compare your actual use to your committed subscribed use, and you pay for the difference. Examine that very closely. Sometimes that true-up fee has people saying, that can't be true. It's a true-up fee. Of course it's true. A couple of best practices, because we're getting very close to the end of this session. Again, begin with the application. Do not shop for the best price because there's no such thing. Some are priced better for small companies. Some are priced better for enormous fortune companies. Some are priced to do database management better. Some are priced to do number crunching better. You've got to really look at each one as it applies to your application. When you begin to lay this out, price various scenarios so you can see how pricing varies within the environment you're thinking about going into. Another admonishment, thou shalt know thy workload. Know the characteristics of your workload. Know how big it is. Note how dynamic it is. How much does it change, up or down? What are the fields? I mean, there's plenty of operations you're going to perform on them. Be very familiar with your workload so you price the right storage, the right processing, the right software environment for each. Even the right operating system running on your VM impacts that. Also, take into consideration when you're doing all of this, not the tender loving care, the total life cycle of your project. You're going to have costs occurring throughout the life cycle of the project. Project them now. Understand as well as you possibly can the total life cycle cost of this project, the total cost of ownership, if you want to call it that, the TCO, but project that carefully, compute that carefully. It will protect you in the long run. And then when you're looking at a particular service, you really need to ask yourself, is the performance of this particular service worth the price they're asking? Only you can decide if that's true. So include that in your thinking. Am I really getting what I'm paying for here? And whatever you do, remember, you're either going to grow or shrink. Nobody stands still. So leave room in your commitments for agility to make the changes as you need to. Don't lock yourself into configuration standards that you're not allowed to change. And make that elasticity available to you at any given time. Even as important as that is to try your best to avoid provider lock-in. Okay, this has been going on since the 1970s at least, and probably before that. It's been going on for 50 years or more. Vendors will sell you specific services, set things up in a specific way so you can't leave them. They become very sticky in your environment, okay? You don't want that. And you know what? If they're a good provider, they don't want that either. They don't want you staying because you have to. They want you staying because you want to. Quality should be the reason that you stay. And as you're distributing your storage, don't leave out leveling. Don't put infrequently used data in solid state storage. You pay through the nose for that. Put it in slow, cheap, difficult to access storage. You're not going to access it often, if at all. So don't be paying through the nose for a high-level service to take care of low-level storage. There is cheap long-term storage available to you. And no, it doesn't have a bunch of garage doors. Okay, so I promised earlier on that I'd make available calculators. All three cloud services have extensive calculators that you can use to analyze your project or your environment, specify new services, consider comparing different services. The links are here. They will be in the deck, and the deck will be available to you. And Scott, it looks like we have about 2 minutes left for questions. I'm sorry.
No, that's great, Howard. Thanks. And why don't we pop it back onto the calculator during the Q&A portion, just so
absolutely,
and keep an eye on those links. And one thing I want to mention, there was a question about a clarification on a point. This whole summit will be available for a replay. You'll get a link in about 24 to 48 hours that you can review it. So don't worry, you'll have plenty of chances on that. And also, Howard's deck here had so much information in it. Be sure to download the deck, and you can get all the details. Especially where he's sort of racing through the hundreds of services from the different providers. Great information to have at your fingertips.
Your next presenter just pinged me to say that he loves those calculators. So
yeah, they're great.
From a deli owner, that's a rave.
True. So one question here from Dennis. It's interesting. Can the other clouds compete with Azure on Windows Server VMs pricing? Since they have and he refers to it as the AHUB program. I'm not quite sure what that refers to, but you had mentioned all the enterprise agreement. So many companies are they have infrastructure where they have an enterprise agreement. Does that give them a an especially serious reason to consider Azure, because of those price discounts.
Yeah, that's very, very. First of all, I've just myself heard about AHub, and I'm not studied up on it, so I'm not going to represent that I am. But I think that you could make a similar statement for all three of the bigs and for many of the others that were on that list, and even others that are smaller than was on the list of market share. There are some very small providers who've come up with very clever offerings, and they've figured out a way to make them very, very inexpensive. A variety of things go into that, which we can't get into now. But the great arbiter, this is like anything else, the great arbiter is to talk to your colleagues, other people in IT who've used these services. Ask the provider if they're offering you their services and claiming they can compete. Ask them to put you in touch with a few of their current customers. Anybody can sell Azure. A lot of providers can deliver Azure. The Azure platform was made available long ago. So there are many providers out there who are running Azure on their own infrastructure. And they may have a way, or maybe they're willing to take less margin than Microsoft, but there are always ways to game the plan. So I would watch out for those. Okay,
sounds good. Well, we're about up on time, so I think we'll have to leave it there. But I think, this has been a really great framework, that you've provided with the, looking at the overall costs of the upfronts, the subscriptions, and then the ongoing costs, and making sure you're taking all of those into account as you look at these cloud costs from various providers. So, Howard, I just want to thank you for your time and a great presentation. A lot of fantastic information.
Well, thank you for inviting me to the forum.
Yeah, and I also want to thank our sponsors as well. Cloud Health by VMware, Zerto, and NetApp. And I'm going to turn things back over to Tracy.